Welcome back to AP US History. This is the Federalist period. This is part two. We left off talking about Hamilton's financial plan. One of the problems facing the new nation was it was in dire need of a sound economy. And Hamilton's going to come up with a plan that's going to be quite successful. There were five components to Hamilton's plan. The first part of his plan was to pay off all the bonds that had been issued during the Revolutionary War and after. They were considered worthless by most. He wanted to pay them off at face value and with interest. He also believed that we should assume the state debts so that they would be more loyal to the federal government. He also believed in a national bank. He believed that, but assuming these state debts, he believed that that would cement the union between the states and the federal government. States with huge debts certainly liked the idea of that plan. And these were the five components. He also believed that a tariff to protect American industry, putting a tax on imported goods from Europe, would raise the prices of those goods and thus make it more competitive for American industry. He also wanted an excise tax on whiskey to raise money for the government. And again, we talked about this briefly before. He wanted to create a national bank, and they will establish 20 banks throughout the United States. Other debt was in the form of bonds. These are certificates that represent payment to citizens. So you can loan money to the government and saving bonds and hold them, and over a period of time they accumulate interest, and eventually they mature, and you get the face value of the bond. He encouraged a protective tariff to, again, protect American industry. This shows a picture of the bank that was created in 1791, and the banking industry, the Bank of the U.S., will have a charter for the first 20 years. As far as the tariffs concerned, it would raise revenue to pay off the national debt and protect American industry. The excise tax on whiskey, again, create another source of revenue to pay off bills. Westerners were resistant to the tax, and this will bring about the Whiskey Rebellion that we'll talk about later, because it was much cheaper to send barrels of whiskey to the east rather than loads of corn. And again, he created the national bank so that there would be a sound banking institution for the United States. The Bank of the United States was created. It put all federal deposits within the bank. It governed the printing of paper currency. You had to have so much gold on hand to match the paper that you printed. Jefferson was opposed to the bank. He believed that it was a little bit tyrannical. He believed that states should control the banking. And that's going to be a reoccurring theme for him. He believed the state banks would not be able to compete with the huge national bank. He was one of those who was a strict interpretation of the Constitution. He could find nothing in the Constitution that gave Hamilton these powers, although in Article 1, Section 8 is called the Elastic Clause, which simply says that the legislative government can do what's necessary and proper for the good running of the country. So he's going to oppose the bank. And he's going to say that the Constitution doesn't give him the power. There's going to be a big squabble between the two, but Hamilton is going to persuade Washington that indeed it's a necessary thing to do. He is a loose constructionist. He believes that the federal government should have broad powers, not necessarily everything listed in the Constitution. And this goes back to Article 1, Section 8, the elastic clause. Anything necessary and proper. He believed that the government had implied powers, that they were implied in the Constitution because they were the government. And eventually Washington will agree, and it will become part of the United States. And these 20 banks are going to be scattered throughout the 13 states. The Whiskey Rebellion, it takes place under Washington's watch. There were several thousand Western farmers who were distilling corn into alcohol, and they didn't want to pay a tax on each barrel of whiskey that they made. Tax collectors were forced to flee. This is a real test to the first national government under the new Constitution. Washington is going to send several thousand troops. The Whiskey Boys decide that maybe this isn't a good idea, and they put down their arms and they go home. And it shows that the national government has a way to enforce its rules and ensure domestic tranquility or peace, that people can't riot or rebel without some consequences. So having an executive branch with someone enforcing the laws, the president, is a significant step for the government. Of course, Jeffersonians, people who believe in states' rights and a weak central government, condemn the actions. This shows the flag that the Whiskey Boys had, but it came really to nothing. The folks in western Pennsylvania put down their arms when they saw the government marching with the troops. Didn't think it was such a good idea to get killed over a barrel of whiskey. The birth of the party system. The Founding Fathers did not envision political parties. Of course, we have the Democrats, Republicans, Libertarian, Communist, a variety of parties out there in today's governmental system. But in those days, there were no parties. There were philosophical differences. You had the Federalists, who believed in a strong central government, and the Anti-Federalists, who believed in a states' rights kind of in a weakened government, central government. Most saw political parties as something maybe disloyal, and it would disrupt national unity. So they didn't necessarily exist. They will come about by 1800, and we will have a change of power from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. There was an acknowledgement there would be factions, that is, people believing in different things, but these factions, these people believing different things, didn't necessarily have an organized party. A little cartoon here with some of the people who've been in the government. Jefferson and Madison will oppose opposition in Congress over some of the things that come about. It's interesting that Madison was a Federalist, but will go over to the Anti-Federalist position later on. The antagonism between Hamilton and others on the Federalist side will grow, and eventually this will Jefferson and his boys and Madison will come up with a different political party. By 1792, 1793, you have the Hamilton Federalists and you have the Jeffersonian Republicans or Democratic Republicans, but not necessarily a political party. The Democratic Republicans will eventually drop the Republican part, and they will take power in the presidential election of 1800. The Democratic Republican Party was started mainly because of the philosophical belief that America should be an agricultural power, and the power should be in the state governments. Jefferson was always fearful of cities. He believed that everyone should become yeoman farmers, then the real power should rest in the states. Our two-party system owed to the clash between Hamilton and Jefferson. Again, the Federalists' strong support of the Constitution, Hamilton's financial plan. Upper class people believed in this plan. They favored the Federalist position. Um, they had apparently the time to study the issues. Um, those who govern those who govern the country ought to govern it or own the government. Or stop. Those who own the country ought to govern it, according to John Jay, who was a strong Federalist. And they distrusted the common man. So you can kind of a profile of a Federalist. They supported a strong central government. They certainly wanted law and order. We're a little bit afraid of too much democracy. The federal government should encourage business and not interfere with it. And they seem to be very pro-British in their foreign policy. They believed that foreign trade with Britain was essential. This was part of Hamilton's plan. You might say that some of the Federalists were mild loyalists. Came from that crowd. Jefferson, again, from his vantage point, favored states' rights and was against the Federalist plan. He advocated rule by the people. However, only those who were illiterate ought to inform themselves. So he believed that you should be educated. Did believe in the wisdom of the common man. Their party appealed to the middle class and the underprivileged. They believed that government, the best kind of government, was the kind of government that governed least. States should retain most of the power. Jefferson believed in farmers. Farming was a noble profession. Cities created social problems. No special privileges for anyone. They believed in freedom of speech because they thought that would expose tyranny. The Jeffersonians tended to be pro-French because the French had supported us during the Revolutionary War. And we'll stop right there and pick up part 3 next time.